We are now looking at aims. Why are aims business? The content of the aims section is the following. We discuss why aims are important in business and also what aims related problems are. Then we present key concepts and systemic guiding principles of aims, and we deal with how we can manage aims. Without clear system operates bureaucracy has been doing. Staff will not be highly result of that. This is to that having meaning. Also, without the system will formulate mediocre. Is typically this organization just say is to double. My question is why treble or quadruple increase? Where does it comes from? Maybe motivating the organization, but and if somebody is saying that very motivating part of the system. Also have a difficulty and to transfer they do not have and how to go about it. A case study or a company, for example, Odis Libre, well, all perfectly clear they need to develop how they need to organize, carry on innovative to leap ahead technology. Clear to every member what that aim is, it would inspire them function that enables achieve that vision. The definition is in other words, a time, a position in time space back field ethos is field that doesn't have influences every organization is doing a subtle way. The aim is there in the towards aims are at least where they of what is good at is being lived. So there is an interface between ethics and sometimes the bound fuzzy, not mission from the point. Sometimes one may be on who looks at it. Period of an ethos and then it becomes ethos again. One of my preferred values in life is to have beautiful things beautifully, to have I think be projected into the future. I need to beautify or redecorate ethos because achieved when the redecorate it becomes an ethos to keep the house cleaning and flowers. Representation aims related problem. What are some of the most important problems? Lack of aims. Well, if we don't know where we are heading for, we can never get there. Systems that don't have clearly specified aims and are still existing function by default and will not survive a major environmental change. So if the environment changes to such an extent that the current aims and the current habits are not suitable anymore, the system will die. Unclear aims is also frequently encountered problem. Different parts of the system function by default, again because they're not clear, and or different parts of the system pursue different aims because it is not clear what actually the aim is. Some part interprets it this way, another part interprets it another way. This very often happens after a major restructuring or transformation in the early phases if it has not been communicated well what the new aims are. And the outcome is an uncoordinated organization or system. And again, it can be life-threatening. Discontinuous aims, this is the situation of the cancer, or aims don't get implemented. Parts do their own thing, like the cancer. Selfish aims at the expense of the stakeholder. In systems theory, we speak of sub-optimizing the larger whole, or the organization, or the supply chain. For example, if a part in an organization wants to do the best for itself, the marketing persons want to, or the marketing department wants to maximize sales, it could be at the expense of other parts of the system the problem of overselling and not being able to deliver. So although the marketing department thrives, it is at the expense of operations and the organization as a whole. So the success of the marketing department sub-optimizes other parts of the organization and the larger whole. The same can be if an organization wants to strive for the best for itself. It could sub-optimize the whole supply chain and ultimately suffer itself. I have experienced once an example with a fruit juice company who, without consideration of the supply chain, went into many different flavors driven by marketing, increased marketing, and upstream they had supply problems because farmers and suppliers of the fruit juice pulp couldn't supply the right amounts of the right flavors in the right time. So again, the one organization wanting to prosper sub-optimized other member organizations on the supply chain and ultimately suffered itself because it could not deliver. The empire building, draining the resources of the larger whole, is another typical example of selfish aims at the expense of others. Hidden aims is a big problem. It can create dissonance and confusion. Conflicting aims, same story. Different parts develop in different directions, creating dissonance in the larger whole. The famous proverb, "A house divided unto itself will fall." This happens with conflicting aims, and it can retard the development of the larger whole. This section deals with the key concepts and systemic guiding principles of aims. Let us look at the definition of aim. An aim is a point in time-space towards which the system moves. It is a description of an outcome of the performance of the system. So I'm saying what I want to achieve in future, and I describe this, and I want to move towards achieving that. This is what we mean by aim. The graphic representation of an aim is a specific arrow tip. This particular tip, as we know from the graphic alphabet of the biometrics, there are other arrow tips as well. The governance arrow tip, the time-space tip, and the impact tip. So to distinguish the aim, it is this specific arrow tip that we use to denote the aim. The aim in an activity system is represented by the orange arrow tip, which illustrates the intended outcome that the activity system wants to achieve. There are different types of aims, and they have different sources. First of all, we have intended aims. That's normally what we mean by an aim. It's the goal we have got, the plans we are making, and so on. These kind of aims are ethos projected into the future to be attained. For example, I have a value in my ethos of beauty. I like to do things beautifully, I like to have beautiful things, and ever so often I project beauty into the future to attain. So I want to beautify my house, meaning redecorate the house. When the house is redecorated, the aim has been achieved, the project is finished, and beauty reverts back into the ethos. So ethos and aims are closely interlinked, except that ethos is a field concept. It contains different values that come into fore at different times to either determine how the system does what it does, or to become an aim to determine what the system wants to achieve. So to become a point in time space to move towards. Another type of aim is an inherent aim. An inherent aim is an observed outcome. For example, in a functional system like the functions of nature, my circulatory function, or the way my organs perform, when we watch that performance, we see that the function always achieves the same outcomes within a range. So we are ascribing a preferred outcome to that particular function, and we can call it an aim. It's an inherent aim. Obviously, the heart itself doesn't have a declared aim. It is the scientist who observes the behavior who says the behavior of the heart is purposeful and it is aimed at achieving particular outcomes. We also have emergent aims. They can arise from the interaction of a system and its environment, or the interaction of different systems. This can be a conscious process. For example, my aim is to meet my friends for lunch, and as we go there, one of us mentions that interesting new film that is on circuit, and spontaneously we decide we go to the film rather than the lunch. So the new aim emerged out of the interaction. The same can occur unconsciously, that one pursues a particular aim, but another outcome is achieved. In weight control, that often happens. I want to lose 10 kilo, and instead I am not achieving that aim because there's some hidden aim, some unconscious ethos, unconscious beliefs or values that sabotage my conscious aim achievement, and there's an emergent aim that is different. Aims can also emerge in the course of evolution. So as systems interact with their environment, and as the environment changes, some systems are more successful in adapting to the environment and change their behavior, creating new inherent aims, as we said previously. So evolution gives rise to emergent aims, which become then the inherent aims. That's typical for the evolution of natural systems. If you're looking at organizational aims, we can distinguish different types of aims, or in human social systems in general. Many aims are described as a purpose. A purpose is the reason of existence for the system. So if I'm saying what's the purpose of my life, what is the purpose of an organization, the answer I get is an aim which is on the borderline between the aims and the ethos section, because typically the answer what the purpose is arises out of the nature of the system itself. And many organizations have good purpose statements which very clearly describe in an overarching way what the organization is about. For example, Walt Disney's creating happiness. That's their purpose of existence. Then organizations have mission. A mission describes more specifically what the system wants to do for its stakeholders, obviously influenced by its purpose. So what is the mission in a biometric system theory? We distinguish that an entity system has outward, inward, and self-directed activity systems. So we are saying a mission says what the system wants to do, what the organization wants to do for its external stakeholders, its internal stakeholders, and what it wants to achieve for itself within the broader purpose of the reason of existence of the organization. From the mission of what we want to do, for example, for our external stakeholders, our clients, and so on, we are formulating ideals. What is the ideal service, for example, that we want to provide to our customers? An ideal is an inspiring aim, And ideals, by definition, are unattainable. It is the perfect service that I want to provide. Why is an unattainable ideal useful if it can't be attained? Well, it continues to inspire the system. For example, the ideal of OD, Vorsprung durch Technik, leaping ahead through technology, is a very clear ideal that will drive the development of its products. Whenever the technological advantage is achieved, competitors will follow suit, and the organization must already work on its next technological leap if it wants to live up to its own ideal. Another type of aim is a vision. A vision is a sensory-rich description of an outcome. Sometimes in the management literature, the ideal and the vision are used interchangeably. This is not strictly correct, because the ideal is an abstract description in a timeless manner of what we want to achieve, while the vision shows clearly in sensory rich detail what the outcome should be. So if we are looking at leaping ahead through technology, this is an abstract description to vividly imagine how the next model of the car, based on the latest in technology, looks like, feels like, drives like. This is what a vision is about. Objective is an aim that is specifically described. It's derived from our mission, our ideals. It is a specific description of what needs to be achieved in the longer term. So it is an outcome that is in the longer term. A goal is a description of an outcome in the shorter term. And then we have aims like strategies that are courses of action we intend to do in order to achieve a specific outcome. So it is a broad course of action that we intend to engage in. And we also have aims like action steps. Those are very specific, intended steps of action we want to take. Aims can be formulated as ends or means. The ends aims describe the outcome of the performance of the system, or the outcome of what the system is. Typical ends aims are ideals, also objectives and goals. They are descriptions of outcomes. By comparison, means aims describe courses of action with which the outcome is going to be achieved, and that is the strategy and action steps, for example. If you're looking at the characteristics of the most typically used aims in an organization, what is a goal, what is an objective, and what is an ideal, we have learned that to formulate goals we need to be smart. A goal needs to be specific. What needs to be achieved in great detail, when, where, how, what, how does it look, how big, etc. Measured, it must be measurable, it must be attainable, realistic, and time specific. It says by which time the goal ought to be achieved. Now, if we compare those characteristics with an aim like an objective or an ideal, we see the following differences. An objective is more broad. It is less specific than the goal, because the objective gives broad outcomes within which very specific goals can be formulated. By comparison, the ideal is generic. It is an abstract description which changes in different contexts. So what technological advantage is, if that is the ideal I want to manifest in my system, that will change as technology changes. the interpretation of what is a technological advantage is dependent on the new technological environment that is evolving. And it gives rise to ever new objectives. The goal is measurable, so is the objective, but it is measurable in a more broad term. So it's the broad objective that is measured in broad terms. By comparison, the ideal is non-measurable. Because it is abstract, because it is eternally valid, we cannot give a measure. We cannot measure beauty. One can apply the measure of fuzzy logic, which measures degree of truth. So we can say, yes, on a scale of 1 to 10, that is beautiful or not. So we can have these more qualitative measures, and they do not measure the specific outcome, but they measure the opinion of an observer maybe about the outcome. Goals must be attainable, so must be objectives, they must be attainable, but in the longer term, by comparison, ideals are by definition non-attainable. Or if we attain them for a moment, like that beautiful moment, the moment moves on and beauty will mean something different in the next moment, or the technological advantage moves on with the next wave of technological development. Goals are realistic, objectives are also realistic. We must set realistic, achievable, measurable objectives. By comparison, the ideal is idealistic. It remains valid in an abstract way and lends itself to reinterpretation in different contexts. The goal is time-specific in the short term. Goals are achieved in the shorter term. Objectives are time-specific, but longer-term objectives. How long the planning horizon is typically depends on the industry. So there are some industries that take a longer lead and have a longer planning horizon, maybe some of the energy industries, while IT industry has a very short planning horizon because of the rapid technological advance. So what is a long-term objective maybe in the oil industry would be 20 years, in the IT industry maybe 5 years at the most. And the goal may be a month, while in the other case it may be a year or 2 years or more. So the time horizon is industry specific. By comparison, the ideal is timeless. It is valid as long as the system lives or as long as the system wants it to be valid. And this is its advantage. So if you're looking, how do we manifest an ideal or an aim in physical reality, then we are following this process. We have an ideal design, a dream, so to speak. That is our guiding star that guides our system forever. This ideal is regularly in our strategic planning sessions translated into objectives and strategies which are concerned with doing the right thing in terms of our ideal. So if we want to achieve our ideal, what must we do in the longer term? What is the right thing to do in the longer term? The broad objectives and strategies that we determine in strategic planning are then cascaded into more detail during operational planning. That's where we formulate the specific goals and the specific action steps. And it is really concerned with doing the things right so that our objectives are being achieved. And the objectives are about doing the right thing so that in the longer term we are manifesting our dream. What is the role of aims? So they want to achieve is client focus. The team task. So pointed to training program to create focused staff, and will be by individual members. For example, to take the example of department is organizational aim to have and will design the and update it and so this is what aiding an organization. Of ends and mean is another, that aims are cascade via longer term to shorter term goal, immediate action. Nothing is immediate before, why not quadruple it? Objective at all compared to from one new technology. If we our current future, the object derived from a long is located currently derived because we think it inspires longer term. By comparison, ideal future aims towards aspire, emulating long terms of less ideals, so towards it, we will short-term goals, immediate action, forecasting, and in aims setting. Another system is having mind and means, or we call functionality more with less. For example, one means if more than multiple aim. I can and I can do business and I can entertain. It's different and one means. I could have one end that through, for example, entertainment is an end, and through station dancing to plan multidimensional. One can use outcome. We can one resource to have, or we can done a lot of brain. It is very easy to strategies and aims and create efficient and effective. Another important aims is is real. The bridge between a vividly imagined, and as a result, the body gets doing the right thing. Really. Imagine to drive, and we really get, we will or the correct in this done with, for example. That is what we also want when we planning, visionary planning, the outcomes that we want, and because of that, to have aim achieved. Study a lot in where, for example, would go on the core a particular shot and then sizes for another the same shot, that the heat rate is visualization, which it is a reality, and the muscles get vision as through exercise. So it's unique that various brains companies use. Okay, that we have, but not now. Look at some of related problems. Huge problem, very lack of meaning that previously, of lack of meaning by default or routine, not likely to mental change. If they significantly fit the new environment, will not survive. Unclear aims, clear ethos, parts function wrong. Ethos means that's wrong.
Sort of change.
I think we would Let us now look at an example of how we can cascade aims through the systems hierarchy. We have different levels in the systems hierarchy within an organization. For example, we have the organizational level, different departmental levels or different functional levels, then team levels within the department or sub-functional levels, and within that we have the level of the individual or the sub-functional level. And of course there can be any number of levels in between. At each level we're formulating aims in terms of ends, or outcomes like objectives, goals, and means, strategies, action plans, etc. For example, if at the level of the organization we decide that we need to create client satisfaction, this is now an end we are pushing to make the organization aware that that is what we need to do. We say, what are some of the means to achieve that? We need to understand the clients better, we need to meet client expectations, and we need to have a customer-focused staff. So this could be some of the strategies at the organizational level. Different departments within the organization would be influenced by different strategies. For example, the marketing department would be concerned with assisting in understanding the client. The meeting of client expectations would certainly drive our marketing as well as operations. And then to create a customer-focused staff would be the responsibility of the human resource department. Now let us, for example, look at the marketing department. They take the strategy of understanding clients and make it their objective. So it's an objective to create understanding of clients, and this can be done by means of client survey, for example, by means of market research, by means of creating focus groups, etc. Now let us look within the marketing department at one of the teams. They may be allocated the task of doing the client survey. So this is the outcome that team wants to achieve. Strategies to achieve that would include to design the survey and then of course implement the survey and eventually to also administer the survey. If you're looking at different members of the team, one of them is taking the responsibility after the survey has been designed and implemented to administer the survey. So this is the objective of that particular sub-function within the marketing department. How can the survey be administered? By sending out questionnaires, uploading data, maintaining the client list, etc. So this is an illustration of how aims get cascaded through the systems hierarchy, aligning the various levels around the intentions at the organizational level and ensuring that aims continue through the systems hierarchy and do not create discontinuities and misalignment. Also, cascading aims ensures that there's not some kind of activity or aim formulated at one level that is not derived from a different level, and that could give rise to empire building or other cancerous activities. The aim of an activity system is cascaded into its sub-activity systems. And this is referred to as spatial cascading. So an aim is cascaded through the space of the activity system into its sub-activity systems. So for example, if my aim is to bake bread, then the assembly of ingredients and mixing and baking will be different than if my overarching aim is to cook a souffle. I may also have to mix and bake, but the aims of these sub-processes will be different. according to the overarching aim of the activity system. How can we manage aims? Aims are set or determined through planning, a deliberate choice of aims. Planning involves setting of aims as well as cascading the aims in time, as we said, from the ideal via longer-term objectives, shorter-term goals to implementation. And planning needs to cascade aims in space throughout the levels of the organization, the levels of the systems hierarchy. If planning doesn't do that, then aims are not managed appropriately. Let us now look at a traditional methodology for cascading aims and creating plans. Typically, a strategic plan is involving the formulation of aims on the basis of the ethos. It involves determining the purpose and the vision and the mission of the organization. And then at the organizational level, key objectives and strategies are formulated, so-called organizational strategic plan, which is cascaded into functional strategic plans and into operational plans within each function. To do strategic planning typically involves analyzing the contextual environment, analyzing the transactional environment, that would include competitor analysis, client analysis, stakeholder analysis. Then it is important to look at the organizational systems, a functional analysis, what is and isn't working in the organization, and an analysis of the inner environment. How are our resources operating and what the resource situation, especially human resource situation, is like. Depending on the information generated, we surface strategic assumptions and determine strategic impacts, and then select strategic issues which will influence the strategic plan, even the ethos, the purpose, key strategies at the organizational level and at the functional levels. The different strategic issues, assumptions and impacts can be clubbed together into various scenarios, and these scenarios will be used to reflect against and influence the organizational and functional strategic plans. The exploration of the external and internal environment and the analysis of the organization is typically done in the famous SWOT analysis. SW refers to strengths and weaknesses, so we would explore the organization, its systems, our resources in terms of the strengths and weaknesses inherent in them, while the analysis of the external environment, the contextual as well as the transactional environment, has opportunities and threats inherent. This is represented by the O and T. So the SWOT analysis is typically surfacing those kind of strategic assumptions and strategic issues that we are using to influence our aim setting or planning, strategic planning. Let us now look at the application of aims in an activity and entity system. In formulating the aims of an activity system, the stakeholder aims need to be considered. This includes the generic aims of the containing function or the generic industry aims. It also involves considering the aims of the containing entity system, in other words, the organization in which the function is located, as well as consideration of the customer aims, as well as aims of other stakeholders. Similar to what we heard in the context of ethos, when one starts exploring the aims of the stakeholders in relation to one's own aims, this could lead to changes in one's aims. It could also necessitate more interaction with a stakeholder in order to be able to align the aims better. And it could lead to a break with a particular stakeholder whose aims are incompatible. And this would necessitate a search for a stakeholder with more aligned aims. In designing and managing aims within a supply or value chain, one needs to consider spatial cascading. That means cascading the aims in the space throughout the system, from the overarching activity system to each of its links. This is illustrated by the orange arrow tips. At the same time, each sub-activity system, as we explained earlier, also has other aims to consider, that of its generic industry, of the organization it is part of the specific customers it has, etc. To create sustainable supply and value chains requires, first of all, that the aim of the containing activity system or overarching activity system is formulated in a sustainable manner, and then that the different links in the chain co-produce that specific outcome. This requires the cascading of the ideal of the overarching activity system into each of its sub-activity systems, where the ideal gets reinterpreted according to the specific function or sub-industry which that sub-activity system represents. For example, if the energy industry aim is sustainability and maximizing renewable energy provision, then the energy producers and consumers reinterpret that vision as appropriate to them. Also, the renewable energy producers will have a different ideal than the non-renewable producers. For example, the non-renewable producers could have the ideal of complementing the renewable energy users and stepping in when renewable energy is not available. Once a system has formulated an ideal, it needs to be cascaded through time, from the timeless ideal via longer-term objectives and strategies to short-term goals and action steps. To ensure coherence of aims along a supply chain, it will be necessary to iterate between the longer-term objectives and strategies of the different sub-activity systems. We have already said that the aim of an overarching activity system is cascaded into each of its sub-activity systems, that is illustrated by the different orange arrows. We have also said that each of the sub-activity systems can have its own function-specific aims that need to be considered as well, or sub-industry specific aims. In the case of an external supply chain, each of the sub-activity systems belong to an independent organization. This is illustrated by the black arrow, which is our business arrow of an organization, but also by the orange and gray arrows, the rounded ones in each activity system, which denotes that they are independent organizations that link up within the larger supply chain. If you're looking at application of aims in an activity system, we have learned that we need to align the aims along the supply chain between the different sub-activity systems and the overarching or containing activity system. We also need to make sure, if we are working with an external supply chain, which consists of independent organizations, that there is an alignment of the sub-activity system in the industry with the organization, its own organization. In the case of an external supply chain especially, we also need to consider the carrying capacity, for example, of the planet, of the activity system as a whole, as well as each of its sub-activity systems. Different sections of a supply chain have different impacts on carrying capacity. For example, if oil reserves get depleted, then this is a different impact on the carrying capacity than solar, which taps virtually unlimited resources of the sun. We also need to look at, in the case of a supply chain, that there is a balanced development between these different industries that have different impacts on the environment, so that the overarching aim is beneficial for all stakeholders. So let us summarize about spatial cascading. We said that the aims from the overarching activity system are cascaded into its sub-activity systems, and they need to be aligned and coherent with each other. We also said that the aim of the sub-activity systems emerges from the overarching supply chain, the cascading of the overarching supply chain, as well as their own function-specific industry. So, for example, if you're taking the energy industry, we may have the overarching aim of clean, sustainable, affordable, etc. energy. And then when we cascade those aims into the sub-aims, there will be function-specific aims like generic aims of the coal industry or solar industry or nuclear industry or hydro energy, etc. And then there obviously will be feedback and adjustments between those different type of aims. The two types, the cascaded overarching aim and function aim within the sub-industry, as well as between the sub-industry and the overarching industry. Having done spatial cascading from the overarching activity system to its sub-activity systems, we also need to do temporal cascading. We will have temporal cascading at the level of the industry, from the timeless ideal over longer term to shorter term objectives. Likewise, at the level of each sub-industries, we will have temporal cascading from the ideal into the longer, medium, short-term strategies. Obviously, as we do that in the implementation planning maybe of industry transformation, there will be iteration between the different items as we understand that in one sub-industry certain goals cannot be achieved in a particular time frame that may have repercussions to what other industries have to achieve or the industry as a whole has to achieve. So there will be iteration between the temporal configurations. There will also be iteration between the spatial and temporal cascading. We have learned about the principle of ends means interchangeability. Previously, this is the theoretical concept behind the temporal and spatial cascading. Another important consideration in managing the aims in activity and sub-activity systems is that they must be sustainable. In other words, aims must be achievable, and their achievement in the future of the system must be sustained. This requires considerations of carrying capacity and balanced development of all stakeholders. What we mean by that is that carrying capacity can differ in different sections of the supply chain. For example, if you're looking at the energy supply chain, solar energy is very sustainable because it works with literally unlimited energy of the sun, while tar sands or oil are finite resources and could be depleted. So if we are planning an industry as a whole, we need to look at the carrying capacity issues along each of its sub-activity systems. The importance of balanced development of all stakeholders has to do with the fact that if some stakeholders are neglected, they could be damaging to the overarching system, or we could create systems that are not supporting all parts that should be supported. So it's very important that we do iterative planning with all the sub-industries who are the stakeholders of the overarching industry along the whole industry value chain. Let us now look at the application of aims in an entity system. Because of the threefold organization of an entity system, it also has a threefold mission. This mission describes what activities and their outcomes the entity wants to contribute to systems in its outer environment, its inner environment, and what it wants to do for itself. From this threefold mission, each activity system within the entity system cascades its own aims. As we learned previously, this is under consideration of generic industry aims, as well as the aims of its clients and maybe some other stakeholders. Entity systems, because of their threefold organization, have threefold aims. We speak of a threefold mission. It means the outward directed activity system aims would be the business aims of an entity system. In other words, what is the overarching mission in terms of its business? The inward directed aims have to do with business support. Typically this demands functional excellence as one of the aspects of a threefold mission, while the self-directed aims have to do with organization support on the one hand, in other words, to set up central services that support all functions of the organization, and also developing the organization itself as an entity, a viable entity that can sustain itself in the longer-term future. Managing aims in an entity system involves, first of all, spatial cascading. The threefold mission of the organization is cascaded into key objectives for the organization as a whole. These could be permanent key objectives, but the organization could also have temporary key objectives at a specific moment in time, which are cascaded into each of the functions and sub-functions of the organization. Based on the cascaded mission and its key objectives, each function determines its own aims as emergence from the cascaded organizational aims, as well as its own function or industry specific aims. There is also temporal cascading at each level of the organization. This implies that at the level of the organization itself, there's an overarching ideal, timeless ideal that the organization wants to attain, and this is translated into longer-term, medium and shorter-term objectives and strategies. Likewise, the aims at each functional level and sub-functional level should have their own ideal, for example, the ideal IT system or HR system or marketing system, and these are cascaded into longer term, medium, shorter term strategies and objectives. In other words, from a strategic to the operational level. There is, of course, iteration between spatial and temporal cascading. Sometimes one aim in one function impacts on other functions or the organization as a whole and requires adjustments there. The ends and means interchangeability is the theoretical foundation of both the temporal and the spatial cascading and the interchanging between them.